Mr. President.
Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, just a little less than 2 weeks ago, President Trump released his proposed budget for 2018, fiscal year 2018, which would begin October 1st. He named his plan a foundation for American greatness. And while unveiling this budget, Director Mulvaney, the OMB director, declared that, quote, "We're no longer going to measure compassion by the number of programs or the number of people on those programs, but by the number of people we help get off those programs." And when I read this and then looked at the budget, I was reminded of the story of the two hikers who get to the top of the mountain. It's just near a big cliff, and it's a beautiful vista, and one says, "Oh, I'm so exhausted from getting up here, hiking all the way up, I wish I could get down quickly." And the other says, "Well, let me help you with that," and shoves him off the cliff. Because that's what this budget does. It doesn't help people get off programs through education or training. It shuts down the programs. It shoves people off the cliff. In this budget, millions of struggling, rural, middle class, low income, and working Americans are thrown off the cliff. Now, they're thrown out of these programs as these programs are just struck down, not because the programs have served their purpose and are no longer needed, but because the president wants to do two things. He wants to build a lot more in terms of the military, and he wants to give a tax giveaway of some $6 trillion in the budget, with most of it going to the very richest Americans. This is not an America First budget. This is billionaires first and rural and working Americans last. We see this vision implemented through dramatic cuts to food stamps and children's health and job training and after-school programs and scientific research, other anti-poverty programs, one program after another, designed to help American families devastated or eliminated, all in the name of building a wall, building more missiles, more bombs, and giving this massive, massive giveaway of the Treasury to the privileged and powerful. Now, there's good news, and the good news is that I think we're going to have a bipartisan coalition, that we can build such a coalition to defeat this budget. Even some of our colleagues in the House Freedom Caucus, who often talk about slashing government spending and eliminating programs, say this proposal, in its impact on working Americans and rural America, is draconian and unacceptable. It's not often you hear folks throughout the entire political spectrum coming together to say the same thing, that this budget is short-sighted, this budget is ill-conceived. But that's where we are now. But this budget tells us a lot, because a budget is an expression of values. And so when President Trump places this budget before us, we gain insight to his values. And what we quickly learn is that President Trump doesn't place value on struggling and working American families and helping them climb a ladder to a better point. What this budget does tell us is our president is all about raiding the national treasury for the privileged and the powerful. Quite the opposite of what we heard when he was campaigning. Now, Franklin Roosevelt once said that as a nation, the test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, but whether we provide enough for those who have little. And by enough, he meant, do we provide a ladder of opportunity for families to get their economic footing, to be able to buy a house, to be able to find a job, to be able to educate their children. But in this budget, President Trump puts out a different test. He is saying with this budget that the test of our progress is whether we destroy programs for working Americans to fund a $6 trillion giveaway to the privileged and powerful. That's Donald Trump's test of progress. And I think we'd find very few in the country who might agree with that vision of making economic and educational progress for working Americans much more difficult. So it's not an American first budget. It's not a foundation for American greatness. It's more similar to a great train robbery, a great raid on the national treasury to benefit those who are already at the very top. It's a budget that hurts children. It's a budget that hurts struggling, hardworking Americans. It cuts 20% from the Children's Health Insurance Program, critical for the health of our children. Shouldn't every child in America have access to affordable health care? That's a value I can get behind. But slashing health care for children, making it harder for them to succeed in life, I can't agree with that. Or let's make children hungrier by cutting the basic food stamp program or school program that 44 million Americans rely on, cutting it by $193 billion. Making children hungrier doesn't help them learn. Helping children learn, that's a value I can get behind. Making it harder for them to succeed in school, that may be a Trump value, but it's not mine, and I don't think it's shared by many members of this chamber. Or we find that he proposes to get rid of the subsidization of interest on student loans, making the cost of college even more unaffordable for low-income and working graduates. He freezes the Pell Grants that have already not kept pace with inflation. He proceeds to wipe out the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program that erases student loans after a decade of service to the public capacities. All of this about making college more expensive. Now, I can get behind the value of making education, higher education, affordable, whether it's apprenticeship training, career technical education. I get behind that value. Four-year college program, making it more affordable, community college more affordable, because some form of education, whether it's in the career technical education world or the community college world or the four-year program, some aspect of that is important to virtually every job in America. Making it more affordable is what virtually every other developed country has done. In Germany, it's free to go to a public university in terms of tuition. Well, not so here in the United States of America. Our students are burdened by massive debt. It's growing and growing and growing. I can get behind the value of saying we shouldn't make college a financial gauntlet because it's so essential to the success of our children. But Trump has a different value. His value is let's make it harder. Let's make it more difficult. Let's put students further into debt. That is not a value that I could support. And again, I think very few in this chamber would share that. And the list goes on and on. But this isn't just an attack on the ladder of opportunity for working Americans. This is an attack on rural America. During the last couple of years, I've served as the ranking member of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture and Rural Development. And in that time, I've seen the tremendous impact many of these programs have on opportunity and the strength of the economy in rural America. I value making rural America stronger, but that's not the value Trump put into his budget. He put into this, let's undercut, let's undermine, let's make it more difficult for rural America. Truly a rural America last budget. eliminates essential air service. Essential air service is essential to key small towns across our nation, including one in my home state. It's wiped out. The economy of that town, Pendleton, would be dramatically impacted by wiping out essential air service. Slashes the contract tower program that supports even more airports, 6 of them in my state. Rural airports that need that contract tower support to be able to be open. And then again, these small towns from Aurora to Klamath Falls would be dramatically impacted. Well, how about rural infrastructure? He takes out the rural water and wastewater disposal program. You know that as I hold town halls around my state, and I go to every county every year, all 36, and before I hold the public town hall where people can ask any question they want, I meet with the local county commissioners, city commissioners, all the local electeds. And in virtually every county, every year, I hear about the challenge of water infrastructure, expanding a clean water supply or wastewater treatment. These two challenges are enormous. And yet, here's President Trump wiping out the rural water and wastewater program. Or how about critical housing programs? Well, here's the thing. In our rural communities, often the economy is hindered by the lack of availability of affordable housing. I've been in town after town after town that say, we had interest by a company to move here because of some of the key assets that we have. And then they decided not to, and decided not to because we don't have affordable housing here in the community for them to be able to hire the staff they need. So we have this program at the federal level. Direct single-family housing loans, direct multifamily housing loans, low-income housing repair loans, farm labor housing loans, self-help housing grants. But here again, the Trump budget wipes them out. The Community Development Block Program that provides flexible strength for rural communities to address local problems. We talk a lot about flexibility here in the Senate, enabling local area to decide how best to use funds. Well, the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, does exactly that. And yet, it's not valued by our president, who probably doesn't even know what the program is, but he wiped it out. Or how about rural business and cooperative service that offers programs to support business development and job training? It's gone too. And his budget slashes USDA's rural development program by about $1 billion, a little less than $1 billion. This is a part of the agency whose programs focus on supporting economic development and housing and healthcare and infrastructure in rural communities. And then we have the impact on rural healthcare. Now, this budget impacts rural healthcare in several different ways. It cuts the Rural Hospital Outreach Grant Program that helps small rural hospitals get resources to create collaboratives with long-term care facilities or with ambulance services, and eliminates the state offices of rural health. In addition, this budget destroys health care for 23 million Americans, and many of those live in rural America. In fact, in Oregon, about 1 out of 3 individuals, almost 1 out of 3, in our small towns find health care through the Oregon Health Plan funded by Medicaid. So rolling back Medicaid would throw some 400,000 people off of health care in Oregon just by itself, and that would make a huge impact in rural Oregon. Now, I've been holding a lot of town halls in rural Oregon this year. I've had over 12 in what you would recall on a map as pretty red counties. And people are coming out to my town halls and saying that they are scared to death about this budget's impact on health care. They are not just scared, they're terrified. And they're not just terrified, they're angry. Because they finally have the peace of mind that if a loved one gets sick, that loved one will get the care they need. That loved one won't end up bankrupt. That's a huge improvement in quality of life. But this budget from the president, that destroys that peace of mind. And it's not just impacting those who directly benefit from the Oregon Health Plan. It also impacts everybody else in the rural communities because the health plan has enabled our rural clinics and hospitals to do much better financially. Out in the northeast corner of my state, it's a very remote and beautiful place. A person told me that their local clinic had gone from 20-some employees to about 50 employees, roughly doubling the health care provided. And why were they able to do that? Because they'd had so much uncompensated care before people had access to insurance. And now that has dropped dramatically, and so their finances are much better. So they're able to hire a lot more people and provide a lot more health care to this rural part of the state. But that changes with this Trump budget. Let me give a few more details about some of these areas, starting with USDA's Rural Development's water program. Last year, 14 projects in my state received $10.7 million in loans and $6.5 million in grants in order to provide reliable, clean drinking water and waste disposal, affecting 12,000 folks in rural Oregon. Vernonia, in Northwest Oregon, relied on these programs to finally improve the town's wastewater system, a project almost 20 years in the making. Now, I've visited Vernonia a number of times. In 1996, it suffered a terrible flood. And then again in 2007, another major flood. The floods overwhelmed Vernonia's wastewater treatment systems and lagoons, caused overflows on public and private properties, overflows into the nearby Nehalem River. But thanks to loans and grants from USDA's rural water programs, the town of Vernonia was able to purchase new equipment, upgrade its wastewater systems, and protect the water for its residents. That's just one community that has benefited. Or let's talk a little bit more about housing. The budget singles out for cuts many housing programs. It eliminates USDA Rural Development's direct housing loan programs and most of the housing grant programs and community facilities programs. Programs like the Rural Single-Family Housing Direct Loans, the Rural Multifamily Housing Direct Loans, the Self-Help Housing Program, the Housing Repair Loans, the Farm Labor Housing Program. With so many states, so many communities across our nation suffering from a shortage of affordable and available housing, how can we consider it a positive thing to slice and dice these programs? Last year, 6,000 rural Oregonian families were living in 211 affordable apartment complexes thanks to USDA financing. But keeping these programs and strengthening our housing initiatives isn't just good for our nation's families. It's also critical for the economic development of rural towns and communities. As I mentioned, so often I've heard from the town leaders that they have a potential deal within their grasp and it falls out of their grip because of the shortage of housing. Well, we need to do better in this area, not worse. Or let's talk about another program, the Forest Service Collaborative Forest Service Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program. Now, this program is an all-lands approach to collaboratively encouraging science-based ecosystem restoration of priority forest landscapes. Or let me put it more simply. Often, in terms of forest health, we have a challenge. The work in the woods can be quite expensive to improve forest health. And often you have disputes between the environmental community and the timber community on just how this should be done. A collaborative brings together these elements, the environmental side and the timber side, with the goal of both making the forest healthier and providing a steady supply of saw logs to the mill. This is something that happened in the Fremont-Wainema forest. And it's given environmental and conservation groups confidence that Fremont-Wainema is on a track to a healthier ecosystem. At the same time, the work helped ensure that there is a balance between the timber industry and environmental protection, which means that timber is still coming and will keep coming to the local mill, helping to create local jobs, like the Collins Mill in Klamath Falls. That mill is able to continue employing more than 80 workers because of the steady supply of logs that make their way from Fremont-Wainema to the due to the eco-friendly forest management practices. Mr. President, this Billionaires First and Rural America and Workers Last budget is going to die here in the U.S. Senate because there's going to be a bipartisan coalition of Democrats and Republicans that say that undermining the success of our families in order to provide a massive giveaway, a raid, if you will, on the national treasury and a handout to the privileged and powerful is simply the wrong way to go. This is really Robin Hood in reverse. This is a situation in which the working families are undermined to provide a $6 trillion raid on the Treasury, with most of it being given away to our richest American families. I don't know that there is anyone in this chamber that isn't already aware that we have massive income inequality here in the United States of America. I don't think there's any member among the 100 senators of the U.S. Senate who are unaware that we have a massive wealth gap in America. It's gotten larger and larger and larger till it's equal to that level or near that level that it was before the Great Depression. That's not a way for America to thrive, to raid working families in order to provide even more giveaways to those who have the most. I must say that this budget doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me the president submitted this. The president himself is a billionaire. The president lives in that world of billionaires. And he became persuaded that helping the billionaires have even millions more would somehow be good for America. I'd like to take the president to real working America, see the real impact on the ground of destroying rural health clinics, see the real impact on the ground of destroying rural water systems, see the real impact on the ground of destroying rural housing programs. Because we need to get the president outside of his billionaire bubble and see the impact so that somehow he gets a grip on what it means to guide this country in education policy and economic policy so that we strengthen that ladder of opportunity rather than destroying it. Thank you, Mr. President.